I'd like you to welcome the small but mighty Idaliz Baez.
Hello. All right, we'll do a check on my mic as well. Is that good? Awesome. So, and check on the clicker. It works. Lovely. So thank you all for joining post-lunch. My talk today is just going to be about the impact that various cloud providers has on being a FinOps practitioner, and what does that mean for us? How do we handle this? My name is Idaliz Baez. I am a certified FinOps trainer and professional. I work for RealOps.io, and we provide private FinOps practitioners trainings and certifications. So, quick look at the agenda. We're going to start with just a little intro on the growth of multi-cloud adoption, and then I'm going to explore what is the importance of this, and also what shortcomings we should be aware of when choosing a multi-cloud strategy. We are then going to be able to take a look at some success metrics and measurements that our FinOps teams can use throughout their FinOps maturity model as we crawl, walk, run, and stumble and fall a couple of times along the way, I'm sure. So we will conclude with some best practices and example deliverables that our FinOps teams can provide, hopefully leaving us with approximately 5 minutes for Q&A. Let's get started with some data. These particular numbers come from the RightScale 2019 State of the Cloud report. Try and cast your mind back to pre-pandemic world, and even back then, we had a response of about 82% of enterprises saying that they already have a multi-cloud strategy, with a little over half of that 82% saying that they are hybrid, operating in both on-premise world as well as some type of public or private cloud. We already see this clear intention of adopting multiple cloud providers. Let's fast forward to this year, 2022, State of FinOps survey, and this particular bit of data is showing all of the cloud strategies and the respondents who are telling us what type of strategy they have. We can see a huge increase in all-in and born-in public cloud approaches. So with that, I mean, ultimately what we're seeing here is that the market has moved on, and we are exponentially growing and adopting approaches that adopting cloud providers, not only single cloud providers, but multiple cloud providers. So FinOps for single clouds is more relevant, and the reality is that we're going to need to be experts in multiple cloud service providers over time. So why do organizations choose multiple cloud providers? First example, we might have some customer requirements, such as performance SLAs, that require us to search out for a cloud provider that we may not already have internally. There may be a decision that is based on mitigating risk of having a single point of failure for a critical workload. But there also may be an idea to potential risk of giving one vendor too much power, and so that way we will diversify our portfolio and help provide some negotiation leverage over time. There also is this siloed procurement processes. And what I mean by that is you might have different geographic regions that the procurement practices differ from region to region, and therefore it requires different types of vendors, and that can also come at additional cloud costs. There are also desired vendor services that may only be available with cloud provider A. And even though the organization has adopted cloud provider B, we now need to choose, or now we need to learn cloud provider A in order to take advantage of that new service. And finally, lovely mergers and acquisitions. As they come around, you may be forced to have your existing teams learn a whole new cloud service provider because it's coming into a new business unit, and here we go. New skills are needed so that we can move forward with that. Now, a couple of real-world scenarios that I've seen as well would be when an organization has siloed IT business units where, say, there was never a specific mandate for how the company was going to adopt cloud. They just said, we want to migrate, and we've heard of this cloud thing. Go for it, have at. And so teams chose what they were most comfortable with. Teams that were very comfortable with Microsoft services ended up adopting Azure. But other parts of the organization were maybe much more familiar with open source, Red Hat, Linux, and kind of found that, Amazon's web services are a better fit for us. So that ended up then having us sleepwalk into having multiple clouds without necessarily thinking about what does that mean for the organization moving forward. On the other hand, you could have specific technology requirements that a customer has put upon us through this lovely RFP process, and it's needed to deliver the products that the customer wants. So there you go. You now are given this particular requirement, and in order to meet it, we have to learn, say, Google Cloud instead now. Thirdly, there could be certain geographic restrictions where the original cloud service provider we chose actually isn't available. Maybe their data center is just not open there yet, and so you have to go with a local supplier. Now, with all of that being said, what do we do to embrace having this disparate cloud strategy world? First and foremost, communication is key. I cannot emphasize this enough. And it's not just about communicating to your FinOps team, your development team, your finance and procurement team. It's also about making sure that there is company-wide documentation, and bring that documentation to the place that teams are more likely or comfortable to read it. So if everybody uses Confluence Pages, have your strategy documented there. And this will help increase visibility of what the organization is doing, and give a reference to ensure that everybody is knowledgeable for what type of trade-offs need to be made when deciding between, hey, I know we're already using cloud vendor A, but is cloud vendor B more appropriate for this next project that I'm trying to deliver? And that knowledge of what options are available is critical for embracing having more than one CSP. So we've gone multi-cloud because we need to pick the correct tool for the job. And it's important to make this analysis as efficient as well as simple as possible. So teams don't have to constantly redo vendor evaluations over and over when, say, that work has already previously been done. And that evaluation can be done in a way that it doesn't have to be 300 pages long. You can put something together that is looking at cost, looking at the architectural patterns, and something that's simple to help make sure that the right decisions and the right trade-offs can be made. FinOps teams can really help with this, to give criteria that teams can agree upon, that is to find that best match of CSP to those requirements. Of course, FinOps teams still have the same important role here. Maximize our purchasing power and adoption of further FinOps capabilities. It's just now broadened to the nuances of more than one vendor. So it does become much more daunting and overwhelming. So what we also want to ensure that we're doing is to be conscious and minimize any shortcomings that can come along with having multiple cloud providers. Let's explore some of those. First of all, refactoring and rework. any type of refactoring and reworking comes with engineering effort. And it is very difficult to ensure that you can operate cloud agnostic. So don't simply assume that something that works in your current cloud provider will work exactly the same way that this other cloud provider says that they deploy that service. So there will need to be some talent upskilling and reskilling in order to be effective and efficient at that, which means decisions are going to be made within the organization based on what type of talent pool mix you have across your teams. And those cloud skills that are, some members of your team are experts, and maybe others are still juniors and kind of hands on keyboard figuring it out. So pods may be dedicated around cloud vendor knowledge, or possibly around the products that they support that then spans multiple cloud vendors. There is a shortcoming of a fear of vendor lock-in. And this tends to be associated with the cost of cloud migrations. Just make sure that you're mindful not to leave any commitments on the table. The fear is often much worse than the reality. And this concern that once we build on one CSP, that building on another will be quite costly can actually drive bad behavior. So lock-in fear sometimes prevents us from committing to the right level to maximize our vendor discounts. And operational costs are going to increase. There is an additional significant overhead because we are going to have additional experts within our CSPs to help set up our security guardrails and governance that now span several environments. Lastly, both our tools and our core teams, like our FinOps teams, have to be designed to accommodate multiple cloud vendors. So here's a list of some good sample measures of success. How do we know if we are actually doing multi-cloud well? I mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. Is your strategy documented? That is step number one. And if you don't have one, that's fine. At least have a placeholder placed for it, where then you can know that you can put ideas in. And as you continue to triage and make decisions for what works best within your organization, you know you have that place to go back to, have that living, breathing strategy document. A process for making trade-offs can be difficult, but it is very important because different CSPs have different strengths, and being able to ensure that you're selecting what works best is going to be something that having a reference sheet for would be beneficial to everybody in the organization. So giving your engineering team that structured way of being able to not only look at costs, but architectural patterns will help ease that stress of making the decision of where are we deploying this next service. And having specific owners assigned to support your vendor relationships. More than ever, that vendor relationship is imperative because they can be allies for education, they can be allies for insight, and it's something that having some team member, or even if you need a couple team members to help have that contact with your vendor, will ease the process of some challenges that come along with having multiple cloud vendors. And upskilling individuals is really important for maximizing the cloud value we get per vendor. I mentioned, maximizing our value based on the architectural patterns and performance, or maximizing trying to make sure that we are getting the best cost for the service we're deploying. And this being able to actually measure success consistently across vendors can be tricky. It is difficult because every cloud vendor is going to report their metrics in different ways. We've all experienced, your expertise and your comfort zone in one vendor, and you understand and you know when you see the bill what services that is tied to and what that means. However, when you're learning a new provider and you're trying to parity that, it's going to be a bit daunting. It's kind of like speaking and learning a new language. So making sure that we can normalize our metrics like for like across vendors is going to be a really helpful measurement for how successful we are operating across multiple clouds. And lastly, establishing our FinOps practices agnostic of cloud vendors. And this is just because if we're doing something well in AWS, it doesn't mean that we're doing the exact same thing well in GCP. And it's important to try and be as agnostic as possible so that you can still bring those principles to the way that you approach each vendor. And now I'll take us through some ideas, sample ideas, as we go through this crawl, walk, run phase of our maturity lifecycle for FinOps. First of all, just getting that visibility into both cloud vendors that we have and those workloads. That is step one for anybody that is, getting that data so you can understand what we are actually using each of our cloud providers for. And these other two, any of our finance folks will be very excited to see on here. Ensuring we can consolidate our invoicing and our payment processing across the cloud vendors, because the billing is going to come in at different times of month, different times of day, according to the various vendors. And it's also really helpful for us to consolidate that and make sure we are collaborating with our finance partners so that they also understand that, hey, I know in the past this is how we've done the billing cycle and how it's worked. However, now we have a slightly new mix that's thrown in, and we've got to account for that. As we mature and we move into our walk phase, we can actually start to learn our service consumption metrics. We are learning about, for example, what does the consumption look like in gigabytes transferred versus in BigQuery, the gigabytes scanned. So again, that idea of a different vernacular based on different cloud providers and being able to understand those metrics and then being able to compare them as best as possible between the two and kind of see how we're doing. That is going to help us as well with looking at how those metrics, how those services are billed. And we can use that as FinOps teams as a lever for influencing our behavior when we are adopting and using multiple cloud providers. So establishing that FinOps team relationship with your vendor. Your cloud vendor is going to be a part of your FinOps team. Maybe not directly on day-to-day life, but they are there to help, and it is important to make sure you have that open communication with them. And of course, configuring some basic notifications and alerts. Having those budgeting alerts or anomaly alerts for possible optimization opportunities. At this point, you've got that visibility, you're understanding your metrics and your consumption. So of course, you can now start to add some threshold metrics to continue monitoring your health of how you are operating in your multiple clouds. And now, as we get into our run phase, we are enabling and transitioning from siloed visibility to having that cross-cloud visibility. The native CSP tools are great for that siloed visibility, but we now know that we're going to have some consolidated views. So that is going to be something that, as a team, you are going to have to find what fits best for you. And with that comes creating executive summaries across your cloud environments. And this provides an effective way for our senior leadership to understand what we are doing within both, or if you're maybe 3 or 4, however many cloud providers you have, and inform leadership team on a monthly basis, or if they're more engaged, if it's a weekly basis, whatever that touch point may be, making sure that they can understand how we are doing. And with that comes our measured consistent KPIs across the vendors. Providing this consistent KPI reporting will will be the backbone for those executive summary reports, but also the backbone for any daily FinOps reports, if it's also hourly engineering reports, all of that is critical. And lastly, our FinOps teams can provide help with a cost-benefit analysis and having a structured decision-making process for the organization. There are going to be people that do not know all of the cost, usage, and performance metrics given within a particular service. And that's okay. This type of cost-benefit analyses can be provided to allow the people that don't necessarily understand those nuances to objectively evaluate where and how to operate their service. So this leads us to a list of FinOps team activities. And what can we do as FinOps practitioners? It is best practice to define the strategy that your organization has so that we can avoid letting anyone make changes that may not align with our organization's desired intention. It is a changing and evolving over time document. So it is not stagnant, and make sure that it is something that everybody understands is there for education, enablement, as well as improvements moving forward. Also, it's important to remember if there was, what the motivations were for migrating to the cloud. Was there a specific executive mandate? You may have decided that the hybrid model you've chosen is because you need to continue to maintain your on-premise environments, and maybe you're just looking for cloud agnosticity. Either way, keeping those motivations in mind will help inform what your FinOps team does on a daily basis. So this will also actually help you when you're deciding what type of multi-cloud model you have. Defining the ways that we think about multi-cloud might be different across organizations and possibly across teams. So it will help us to decide a best fit by application or customer requirement, or maybe best fit by the technology that we need to support, and possibly best fit just by cost. So having that commodity use consumption may be the #1 most important thing. So the impact on our FinOps team in the business is also around making sure that we are upskilling. We are constantly learning because there is a wealth of knowledge across each of these cloud providers, and it is unrealistic to expect that every single person is going to be an expert across all of these clouds. So it's important to realize that there will be technical issues that differ, and just trying to be aware of certain services having limitations that maybe a different CSP doesn't have that limitation. So the reporting, the KPIs, and having that consistent KPI and reporting across clouds is the final one I'm going to mention here, just because being able to effectively measure across our CSPs will help us understand our successes as well as our failures. And this does require some data normalization in order for us to effectively do so. And that leaves me with some advice for practitioners embarking upon multi-cloud strategies and example deliverables that we in our FinOps teams can provide. So make sure that we are delivering effective education and enablement to our engineering teams to help them make smart trade-offs. I also would like a little shout-out caveat here that the enablement and education definitely also should expand to, say, your finance or procurement teams. It will be slightly different, so make sure that you are tailoring that education accordingly to the audience and equipping them with the knowledge that they need in order to do their job the way that it needs to be done. We need to support decisions with that cost-benefit analysis so that any type of tooling or framework that our FinOps teams provide can help the business evaluate decisions consistently. And that is a huge win. let's make sure we are setting appropriate timeframes and having regular touch points. It's very easy to say, I want to have that cost-benefit analysis for XYZ comparison across 3 clouds tomorrow, or yesterday, typically is the mandate. However, that's not fair. So let's make sure that we are having that regular cadence and setting timely, time frames that are realistic. We need to understand how we use our defined KPIs to effectively benchmark within a given CSP and across CSPs so that we provide support and encouragement when we are struggling. And last but not least, ensuring that our senior leadership team is bought in to what we are doing as a FinOps team and understanding why this is important so that we can maximize the value of all of our usage across our cloud vendors. Yep, with that, I do have a couple of minutes for Q&A. You want me to go back to the walk? Yeah, no problem. Ben will chauffeur a mic over to you. Thank you, Ben. Back to walk.
So here you say vendor. Vendor means AWS, Azure, those are the vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Oracle, or
Okay.
yeah, whichever.
Here is a question. If you talk to AWS, man, you are using Azure, that's why your cost is up. Why don't you use everything AWS? They can say you. So the other way, they will also say, how do you handle in that?
And that's a great question. So this is where the consistent KPI reporting is critical, because the cost metrics for say Google's cloud or Azure's cloud is going to be different than what you have in AWS. So while yes, it might be, say, less expensive in one vendor to go serverless, it might actually be more expensive in another one. And it really does kind of come down to being able to look at what service are you trying to deploy and being able to measure that. And also don't forget this idea of the engineering teams that you have. So even if it is, say, cheaper in one vendor, is that going to be easier and best fit for your engineering teams and the architects that are going to be deploying there? What other restrictions are there? So there are lots of questions that need to be asked in order to put together a fair evaluation before deciding cloud vendor A versus cloud vendor B. So I think I hope that helps answer that question. Yeah. Oh. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks. So you mentioned documenting the strategy. What would be the key things to have in that documentation if someone's starting out for a multi-cloud?
Awesome question. Yes. So I would say step one, what is the current cloud environment and current landscape? And then step two, what would be what are you evaluating? And then also being able to list out the products or the key team members to go to. I've always found it really helpful. You have to pull on the existing knowledge of your team members as far as making those decisions moving forward. So not only understanding what you currently have and who to go to for those questions, but then as we are evaluating moving forward with our future deployments, who is our good touch point and contact there. So it is a very collaborative effort, and I would say those are probably some of the key things. As you grow and you do maybe have that cost-benefit analysis framework or some quick tools to kind of help, putting that in there, putting basically any tool that you can to help people that go to that main document so that they can have a quick find for what they're looking at. We have time for one more question. Or, yeah, no worries if not.
What personas would want to be involved in your multi-cloud strategy?
Yes, we definitely want to have our engineering folks. We want to have the finance and procurement teams, although they might ask questions at first as to why they're being educated on this. And as soon as you tell them that the billing cycles are actually different, you will have their attention, and that's going to be the helpful information there. Yeah, and then of course you've got your FinOps champions.
Thank you very much. Let's show our appreciation to Idaliz Baez. Thank you very much indeed.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.